Hi, I'm Mike Rainville. My company's Maple Landmark Woodcraft here in Middlebury, Vermont. And we make things like you see right behind me, toys and gifts and games and a lot of small wood products and things like that. Thought I'd talk to you about the exciting subject of sales tax. When we had planned to do a shop tour here with Vermont Woodworks Council recently. It was something I kind of put on the agenda to talk about a little bit, and unfortunately that meeting was canceled due to COVID concerns and whatnot. And I was asked to maybe put my thoughts together and share them because they might be valuable for other people. And so I've got some notes, and I thought I'd go through. I'm not a lawyer or a tax expert or an accountant or anything like that. I just have the firsthand experience of having a recent tax audit from the state tax department for sales and use tax. And while we're really good about what we do, you find that there's a lot of intricacies in the rules that can easily trip you up, even when you're trying to do the right thing. And from that experience and a few other things along the way, there's just a few tips and tricks that I've put together, and I just thought it'd be interesting because we're all woodworkers and we're focused on what we do, and we don't necessarily have time to be reading tax law on a regular basis. And the state tax sales and use tax law is well over 100 pages. It covers all kinds of things. So yeah, there's a few little things I thought I'd cover for you. First, the experience of the audit. I got notification in September of 2019, so well over a year ago, that they wanted to look at the three-year look back to investigate, just to be sure we're doing things right. I don't have any reason to believe that we were anything other than just a random pick. So they came, an auditor, over an extended period of time. Technically, the process is not complete yet. COVID delayed it some, but this is, I guess, always a long process. And the auditor came off and on over several months, about 12 times to our place, 12 days, and just went through records and took a lot of data home and went through it. And once COVID hit, then everything was remote, and it continued. So there was a lot of time put into this. There's a lot of data that we have that they had to go through. And my only satisfaction, I guess, is even though that they found some for us to pay, I don't think it paid for the time of the auditor spent on this process. But anyway, it helps to know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. So I just thought I'd share some of the experiences. We're all of a manufacturing sort, and we all know that we're exempt from tax on the things that we buy. But that's there's a lot of caveats to that. It's not everything we buy, and you probably know that. But there's probably some finer details that you may not be aware of. So they looked at both things, our sales records, sales receipts, and our purchase receipts. So just about virtually every transaction that we did. The only thing they did to make it easier is they picked one year. They picked 2017, and they decided to pick 1 month out of each quarter to look at in depth, just to see. And then with our acquiescence, extrapolated that out to a 3-year time period. So if they found a nickel or dime here or there, then it was essentially times 9 is what they wanted to collect. And given the time it took just to go through those 4 months, we couldn't afford to spend more time than that on it ourselves, because it was a real drain on our time. So on the sales side, you're probably well familiar. If you're selling to a reseller, then they can claim an exemption. If you're selling it out of state, obviously it has nothing to do with Vermont sales tax, as long as it's being delivered out of state. If it's in state, if it's to a reseller, like to a retailer or something like dealer or something like that, then if they are willing to give you a certificate, then they can be exempt. And you pretty much, for the most part, take those forms at face value. But you got to have the form. It needs to have the name of the DBA that you're doing business with on it. If there's some other corporate name, then you've got to have the name that's in your records on that form for it to be recognized by the state. So you have to have the form, not just a tax number, but filled out. Form S3, I believe it is, or S3M is the one if you're claiming a manufacturing exemption. So you need that in your record. We started at about the 2017 point being much more vigilant about collecting those forms. And that was a good thing, although we have some accounts at that time that never bought from us again or something, and we didn't have their forms and we couldn't go back to them. Some were out of business. And so we cost us a little bit there. But it's good to have all that information in line. On the purchase side, and that's where it's more interesting as to what's taxable and what's not. On the sales side, you kind of know that, I mean, we're not selling food. It's what we're selling is taxable. So there's not a question there. But on the things you buy as a manufacturer, there's a lot of things that are exempt, but there's a lot of things that aren't. Office supplies and equipment are not exempt. You have to pay sales tax on that. If you have, and in our case, we bought a new server in the look back period, and all capital depreciable expenses in the 3-year period were looked at. That wasn't subject to sampling. And we bought a server, and that's used for both in the production and serving the production environment, serving the office. And they determined that was largely a taxable piece of equipment. I'll get to that again in a moment. But when I pulled the receipt, I had paid sales tax on it. So that was a non-issue. Other things, maintenance supplies, parts, parts are exempt, but maintenance supplies are not necessarily. Brooms are not exempt for cleaning the floor. Auto parts are not exempt. And that got a sticky point with my relatively green auditor who kept seeing bills for Napa auto parts for belts and bearings and stuff. And she kept telling me auto parts are not exempt. And I said, but I use them as repairs for my equipment. And she says, well, I use auto parts in your equipment. And I said, no, cars use equipment parts for them to operate. It's all the same thing. And she puzzled over it, and she must have asked somebody, because after a while she left me alone on it. So again, back to the equipment piece, equipment that is not used at least 96% of the time in manufacturing, in an eligible manufacturing use, is not exempt. And so an example of that is we had a bagging machine that is used to bag our parts, and as part of the process, you got to get it bagged and get it to the customer. But we use it some to bag repackage parts that we buy, marbles and things like that, that we sell as spare marbles on the market for games. And we do a lot of that. And there were other things that we repackaged that I didn't tell her about, but we'd already hit the 4% threshold with that. And there was also questions about whether it was necessary to package the product, because some products we sell with that bagger and some products we sell in other bulk fashions. And she says, well, that's not necessary that you use the bagger, so it's not a necessary part of the production process. And I take issue with that, but there were enough other things that I really couldn't fight that fight. So you got to be careful about how bits and pieces of equipment are used. If you've got I don't know, things you use for lawn equipment or something like that. And, that's not a manufacturing use. We also got a case of monitoring equipment. You can buy equipment is fine, but any monitoring things to keep it running are not. Now, often it's sold with a piece of machinery, and I would suggest any piece of machinery that you buy have it all wrapped up in one price. But we had to replace our spark detector for our dust collection system, and that's a monitoring device, and so therefore they collect a tax on it. And suppression equipment is exempt, fire suppression equipment, but fire monitoring equipment, I guess, is not. And so let's be that as it may. I'm not going to say that everything I tell you is straight. It's as I understand it, as they were telling me. And there's some things that probably, if it was more material and cost, I would fight it further. But of course, they rely on getting you here and there, and not having something so valuable that you're going to pick a stink about it. So other things that come up, and it's an odd list of things. You may or may not be aware of the rules around personal protection equipment. Personal protection equipment, for the most part, is exempt for workers. But if you have personal protection equipment for management or visitors or anything like that, it is not. So figure that line drawn when you supply safety glasses. This is not something he bothered me about. I just know it's something that has been discussed a lot and has hung up many PPE suppliers. Shipping charges. If you buy something, if it's exempt, if it's not exempt, if it's taxable, the shipping costs for that are taxable if it's arranged by the company that's selling you the materials. Maybe you're having some office equipment shipped to you or something like that. And but if you arrange the shipping yourself, then it's not deemed to be a necessary part of the transaction, and so that secondary arrangement that you made to get something to you is not taxable. So that's kind of interesting. Doesn't always apply because so much we buy is exempt, but shipping materials. If you're shipping product out in boxes, or you have some kind of packaging, if it's on a wholesale basis, it is exempt. If it's direct to consumer, that is not considered a manufacturing part of the manufacturing process. It's considered distributing, and distributors are not exempt from their shipping materials. And so they had to split some hairs on the things we buy, because we do both on a very regular basis with exactly the same materials, exact same boxes. And they came up with their own numbers, and they were pretty favorable, so I just let it go. Packaging of the product itself. So we do a whole lot of small things that we need boxes for, and we have things like these block sets up here, and the box we put those in is exempt. Now, it could be a really fancy printed up box, or it could be a plain Jane just corrugated box. If we take a plain Jane corrugated box and put our labels on it, then those labels are taxable, because that's not necessarily part of the packaging. So, but if we had a fancy box, it's all exempt. So it's all in what you're buying and how costs are split out. Let's see. Books, magazines, anything like that are taxable. But newspapers specifically are not. And when it comes to digital things, cloud services, cloud computing services, say you sign on to a portal and you're working on something on a website, you're getting the services, that's not taxable. But anything you download, any app or whatever, to your own equipment, to your own computer system, server, tablet, whatever you have, is taxable. And any ongoing maintenance that you paid, maybe it's a monthly subscription or software updates, annual updates, or anything like that, that's taxable as well. So I know the state's actually trying to expand it out to the cloud, but they're having a lot of fights over that. A lot of you probably know, because it's actually would be a big cost. Heating oil and electricity are exempt for manufacturing purposes. So you probably submit forms that you have to renew every 3 years to your utility suppliers, claiming how much of your bill is manufacturing purpose. It might be 90% or something like that, but you kind of have to specify that to get that arrangement. But forklift propane is taxable, and our local suppliers, sometimes they charge us, sometimes they don't. We never question it, and so we had a few bills that it was nickels and dimes. Hired photography is taxable, whether they're professional or not, whether they charge you tax or not. It doesn't matter whether somebody charge you tax. The service is taxable, and so you have to pay tax on that. And obviously, if you do photography yourself, then that's a whole different deal. One thing that really got us was association dues. They actually checked out the associations we're members of, and to see what we got for member services or member benefits, and if we got anything that they considered tangible, then they considered those dues to be taxable. And the example is our local Chamber of Commerce allows us a stack of a printout of mailing labels for members, so we could contact every member once a year if we wanted to use that service. Or we have the opportunity to borrow their AV equipment if we have an event or something like that. Neither of those things we've done, but that is the potential for getting something tangible. So therefore, it is taxable. And if you were to rent that AV equipment somewhere else, presumably you'd be paying tax on it. So they charged us for our entire dues for that organization, sales tax, even though they don't go to that organization directly and say, hey, you got to charge sales tax. They're making us pay under an audit situation. The Vermont Woodworks Council, they checked out the website and couldn't find anything tangible that the Woodworks Council sends out. So we didn't have to pay tax on that. There was another organization where we got a monthly magazine, and they said, well, you get a magazine, so your dues are taxable. But I was able to show them that you could get the magazine if you just paid them $30 a year, as an individual or something. And you didn't have to pay as much as we pay to get that magazine. And they kind of backed off on that one. So there's a lot of hinky things. And sometimes you all think they're trying to find things to charge you for. And all in all, it wasn't a terribly bad experience. It was just very time consuming and frustrating because I had an auditor who didn't understand manufacturing at all. And it just sucked up an awful lot of time. And but we have some things we're going to do different in the future. Again, I'm not going to do not run your business by what I'm telling you here now. These are just some things for you to think about, keep in mind as you're going about your business. I kind of asked them, how do you know without trying to interpret the 100 pages of tax law as to what's taxable and what's not? And they said, well, you need to talk to your hired guns, or you can always send a note to the tax department, ask them. And I said, well, how do you know what to ask when you don't know what you don't know? And they said, well, that's you just have to ask, that's all. And well, okay. And if all of us asked them of every transaction we had, I think we'd knot them up pretty tight for a while. But I don't know, it's that way with anything government related. You have to kind of deal with it as it is. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents, and hopefully it's helpful for you. Thanks.